The bitter wind howled across the empty plains of Colorado Territory, 1867, as Tabitha Lawson trudged through the muddy main street of Silver Creek, one hand supporting her swollen belly, the other clutching her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. The whispers followed her like shadows harsh, cutting words that sliced through the air as surely as the cold. There she goes again, the Lawson girl. What a sin she carries. No husband, no ring, just shame growing inside her. Tabitha kept her head high despite the tears that threatened. At 20 years old, she had already weathered more storms than most, and she would weather this one too. The boarding house where she'd been staying had given her notice that morning. Respectable establishments couldn't house women of her sort, they'd said. As she approached the general store, her last hope for employment in this unforgiving town, the owner, Mrs. Whitaker, stood in the doorway with arms crossed. "I've already told you, Miss Lawson, we don't need your kind working here. Sets a bad example." Tabitha swallowed her pride. "Please, Mrs. Whitaker, I need the work. My baby will come in less than 2 months, and Your poor planning isn't my concern," the woman sniffed. "You made your bed. Now lie in it. Or better yet, go back east where they might tolerate such indiscretions." Tabitha bit her lip. Going east wasn't an option. Not after what happened. Not after Daniel had a sudden commotion down the street interrupted her thoughts. A group of riders was approaching, their horses kicking up dust as they neared. Leading them was a man Tabitha had never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. The riders slowed as they reached the general store, and the lead man tipped his hat to Mrs. Whitaker, who suddenly transformed from righteous judge to simpering shopkeeper. "Mr. Montgomery, we weren't expecting you back so soon." "Cattle drive finished early," the man replied, his voice deep and measured. His eyes, piercing blue beneath the shadow of his hat, drifted to Tabitha, then to her stomach, before returning to Mrs. Whitaker. "Need supplies, heading back to the ranch tonight." Mrs. Whitaker practically tripped over herself to usher him inside, leaving Tabitha standing alone on the boardwalk. Tabitha turned to leave, but a wave of dizziness suddenly swept over her. She'd not eaten since yesterday noon, having saved her last coins for a room that night. Her vision swam, and she reached out to steady herself against the hitching post. "Miss? You all right there?" The voice came from behind her, and Tabitha turned to see one of the riders who'd stayed outside, a younger man with kind eyes. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, straightening her spine with the last of her dignity. "You don't look fine," the man pressed. "Let me fetch you some water at least." Before she could protest, Mrs. Whitaker reappeared at the door, her eyes narrowing at the scene. "Tommy, don't waste your time. That one's trouble." The rider looked confused. "Madam?" Mrs. Whitaker pointed accusingly at Tabitha's stomach. "Unmarried and carrying. A sin if ever there was one." Tommy's face colored, but before he could respond, a shadow fell across them both as the tall man Mr. Montgomery stepped out of the store. "That true, miss?" he asked, his gaze direct but not unkind. Tabitha lifted her chin, defiance masking her fear. "My circumstances are my own, sir." "They're calling you a sin," he said, his voice so low only she could hear it. "They can call me what they wish. Doesn't change who I am." Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or recognition. He studied her for a long moment, then stepped closer. "Name's Mason Montgomery. Own the Silverhorn Ranch about 10 miles west of here." His eyes flicked to her belly again. "You got somewhere to go? Someone waiting for you?" Tabitha hesitated, years of learned caution warring with desperate need. "No, sir. Just myself." Mason nodded as if coming to a decision. "My sister died in childbirth last year. Her husband couldn't bear to stay. Ranch needs a housekeeper, has since she passed." Job's yours if you want it. Comes with room and board. Tabitha stared at him, waiting for the cruel joke, the laugh that would follow. But his expression remained serious, his eyes steady on hers. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "You don't know me." Mason Montgomery's weather-beaten face softened slightly. "They called her a sin for carrying alone," he said quietly. "But I'm saying, then let me be your salvation." He held out a calloused hand. "Not in marriage, miss, but in honest work and a safe place. What do you say?" Behind them, Mrs. Whitaker made a scandalized noise. "Mr. Montgomery, you can't possibly be serious. This woman," Mason interrupted, his voice hardening, "is accepting a position at my ranch. And I'd be obliged if you'd fill my supply order, Mrs. Whitaker, without further comment on my hiring practices." Tabitha looked at the outstretched hand, a lifeline in a storm that had been raging far too long. With only a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. "I accept, Mr. Montgomery." "Good," he nodded. "Tommy, help Miss Lawson," she supplied. "Tabitha Lawson. Help Miss Lawson onto your horse. She'll ride with you back to the ranch." As Tommy helped her up, Tabitha caught sight of the townspeople watching, their faces a mixture of shock and disapproval. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel the sting of their judgment quite so sharply. Instead, she felt something she'd nearly forgotten: hope. The ride to Silverhorn Ranch was mostly silent. Tabitha sat in front of Tommy on his horse, her back straight despite her exhaustion. Mason Montgomery rode ahead, leading their small procession with the quiet authority that seemed as natural to him as breathing. As they crested a hill, the ranch came into view, a sprawling homestead nestled against rolling hills, with a large main house, several outbuildings, and vast fenced pastures dotted with cattle. It wasn't the largest ranch Tabitha had seen since coming west, but it was well maintained and impressive nonetheless. "Welcome to Silverhorn," Mason said, reining in his horse and turning to look at her. "It ain't fancy, but it's solid." "It's beautiful," Tabitha replied honestly. They rode into the yard, where several ranch hands stopped their work to watch curiously as Mason dismounted and helped Tabitha down from Tommy's horse. "Fellas, this is Miss Lawson. She's our new housekeeper," Mason announced, his tone brooking no questions. "She'll be staying in the main house." The men nodded respectfully, though Tabitha could see the questions in their eyes. A woman in her condition, alone, was unusual anywhere, but especially on a remote cattle ranch. Mason led her to the main house, a two-story structure built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, the house was clean but sparse, clearly a place that had been maintained but not truly lived in. "My sister Sarah, she kept things nice," Mason explained, leading Tabitha through the sitting room and into a large kitchen. "Since she passed, we've managed, but—" He gestured vaguely at the utilitarian space. "Could use a woman's touch again." "I'm a good housekeeper," Tabitha assured him, "and I can cook, so preserve whatever you need." Mason nodded. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the right. Has its own small stove for heat. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. We've got indoor plumbing, at least in the main house. One of Sarah's demands when we built the place." A hint of sadness crossed his face. "She always did like her comforts." "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I don't know how to repay your kindness." "It's Mason," he corrected. "And there's no kindness to repay. It's a job. You work, I pay. Simple as that." He paused, his eyes briefly dropping to her belly. "When's the baby due?" "Early December, the doctor said, about 7 weeks from now." Mason nodded. "We'll make arrangements. Doctor's in town, but we've got Mrs. Castillo Ramon's wife on the next property over. She's midwifed half the babies in the county." "I appreciate that," Tabitha said softly. "Well," Mason said, suddenly awkward, I'll let you get settled. Dinner's usually at 6. Cook for yourself and the men, about 8 of us total. Any questions? Tabitha shook her head, though she had 100. All right then. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Miss Lawson? Yes? Whatever brought you here, whatever happened before, it doesn't matter at Silverhorn. Fresh start, you hear? With that, he left, his boots echoing on the wooden floor as he strode out of the house. Alone in the kitchen, Tabitha let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hand drifted to her stomach, feeling the reassuring kick of the life inside her. We might be okay after all, little one, she whispered. Tabitha's first days at Silverhorn passed in a blur of activity. Despite her condition, she threw herself into her duties, determined to prove her worth. She rose before dawn each morning to cook breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her days cleaning and organizing the long-neglected house, and prepared hearty dinners each evening. Mason was rarely present during daylight hours, leaving at first light to work with the men and returning only for meals, which he ate quickly before disappearing again. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance, as if afraid to intrude on her space. The ranch hands, initially wary, gradually warmed to her. Tommy, the young rider who'd helped her in town, was the friendliest, often stopping by the kitchen to chat while she worked. From him, she learned more about Mason Montgomery. Boss lost a lot, Tommy told her one afternoon as she kneaded bread dough. His parents died of fever when he was 20, left him and Miss Sarah the ranch. He built it up from nearly nothing. Then last year, Miss Sarah died in childbirth, baby 2. Her husband couldn't take it, rode out one night and never came back. The boss, he blamed himself for not getting the doctor sooner. That's terrible, Tabitha murmured, understanding now why Mason had been moved to help her. He's a good man, Tommy continued, just keeps to himself these days. Before all that happened, he used to laugh more. As November deepened, so did Tabitha's understanding of Silverhorn and its owner. Mason was a fair but demanding boss, respected by his men for his hard work and integrity. He never raised his voice, but his expectations were clear. The ranch was well run, profitable, and everyone from the lowest hand to Mason himself contributed to its success. One evening, as Tabitha was finishing the dinner dishes, she heard a soft knock at the kitchen door. Opening it, she found Mason standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Evening, Miss Lawson. Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. Please. Come in." He stepped inside, removing his hat. In the lamplight, Tabitha noticed for the first time the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, the way his brown hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. "I brought these," he said, holding out a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Found them in Sarah's things. Thought they might fit you." He cleared his throat. "They're maternity clothes. Seems a waste to let them sit unused." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Tabitha accepted the bundle. "Thank you. That's very kind." "It's nothing." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. "Also wanted to let you know I'm heading to Denver tomorrow. Business with the cattle buyers. Be gone about a week. Tommy and the boys will keep things running, but if you need anything—" "I'll be fine," Tabitha assured him, "but thank you for letting me know." Mason nodded, then surprised her by asking, "How are you settling in? House meeting your needs?" "Very well," she replied. "It's a lovely home. Your sister had good taste." "She did." A shadow of grief passed over his features before he controlled it. "Well, I should let you rest. Early start tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Tabitha impulsively called, "Mason?" He paused, looking back at her. "I've made apple pie for tomorrow. I'll set one aside for your journey, if you'd like." A small smile, the first she'd seen from him, lifted one corner of his mouth. "I'd like that very much, Miss Lawson." "Tabitha," she corrected softly. If I'm to call you Mason, then please, I'm Tabitha. He nodded, the smile lingering. Tabitha then. Good night. After he left, Tabitha unwrapped the bundle to find several beautiful, well-made dresses designed for a woman in her condition. The thought of wearing something other than her own worn, patched dress was overwhelming. She pressed one of the soft garments to her face, inhaling the faint scent of lavender sachets, and allowed herself to cry for the first time since arriving at Silverhorn. The week of Mason's absence passed slowly. Tabitha found herself watching the road more often than necessary, a fact that Tommy noted with a knowing smile but mercifully didn't mention. She used the time to delve deeper into organizing the house, eventually venturing into what had been Sarah's sewing room. The room was a time capsule project half finished, a rocking chair with knitting still in a basket beside it, a crib in the corner covered with a sheet. Tabitha stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in this space of lost hopes and dreams. She was about to leave when she spotted a leather-bound book on the small writing desk. Opening it, she discovered it was Sarah's journal. Though she knew she shouldn't read such a private document, her eyes caught a passage that stopped her. Mason works too hard, takes too much on his shoulders. Mother used to say he was born responsible. I fear what will become of him when this baby comes, and I'm busy with motherhood. Who will remind him to live, not just survive? Who will make him laugh when I can't? My brother needs someone to love, though he'd never admit it. Tabitha closed the book, her heart aching for both the sister who'd worried about her brother and the man who'd lost so much. She carefully returned the journal to its place and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. That evening, a fierce storm blew in from the mountains. Thunder rattled the windows as Tabitha prepared a simple dinner for herself and the ranch hands. The men ate quickly and retired to the bunkhouse, leaving her alone in the large, creaking house. As the storm intensified, Tabitha found herself unable to sleep, the baby restless within her. She made her way downstairs to make some tea, jumping when a particularly loud thunderclap coincided with the front door bursting open. Mason stood in the doorway, drenched and travel-worn, 3 days earlier than expected. Mason, we weren't expecting you until Saturday. Tabitha hurried forward, taking his wet coat. Come in before you catch your death. Storm's moving east, he explained, water dripping from his hat onto the floor. Thought it better to push ahead of it rather than get caught on the road. You must be freezing. Sit by the fire. I'll fetch you some tea or something stronger, if you prefer. Tea's fine, he said, following her into the kitchen where the stove still provided warmth. Sorry to disturb you so late. Nonsense, I couldn't sleep anyway. She gestured to her belly with a small smile. Someone's restless tonight. Mason's eyes softened as they often did when her condition was referenced. Sarah was the same. Said her baby danced all night and slept all day. He looked away quickly as if the memory pained him. Tabitha busied herself with the tea, giving him space to compose himself. When she brought the steaming cup to him, their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the hot liquid. How was Denver? She asked, taking a seat across from him. Productive. Secured a good price for the spring herd. Bought some supplies. He sipped his tea, then added almost shyly, and some things for the baby. Hope that's not overstepping. Surprised and touched, Tabitha shook her head. Not at all. That's very thoughtful. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the storm raging outside while they remained warm and safe within. Can I ask you something, Tabitha? Mason finally said, his voice low. Of course. The baby's father, is he? He stopped, shaking his head. Forgive me. It's none of my business. It's all right, Tabitha said softly. He's dead. The words hung in the air between them. Daniel was his name. We were to be married, but... She swallowed hard. There was a robbery at the bank where he worked in Kansas City. He tried to protect me. I'd come to meet him for lunch and was shot. Died in my arms. Mason's face reflected her pain. I'm sorry. Afterward, when I discovered I was with child, his family wanted nothing to do with me, said we weren't properly married, so the baby wasn't truly a Montgomery. She gave a bitter laugh. Ironic that I've found sanctuary with another Montgomery, halfway across the country. Daniel Montgomery? Mason asked, a strange expression crossing his face. Tabitha nodded. Daniel Montgomery of Kansas City. Did you know him? Mason shook his head slowly. No, just an unusual coincidence. He set down his cup. What will you do after the baby comes? It was a question Tabitha had asked herself countless times. I don't know, she admitted. Find work somewhere, I suppose. Save enough to make a proper home for us. Mason studied her face for a long moment. You could stay here, he said finally. Silverhorn's a good place to raise a child. Safe, clean air, room to grow. As your housekeeper? Tabitha asked, her heart beating faster though she couldn't say why. For now, Mason replied, his eyes never leaving hers. The future, well, that's yet to be written, isn't it? Before she could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind slammed against the house, making them both start. Mason stood abruptly. I should let you get some rest. Thank you for the tea, and for waiting up. I wasn't waiting up, Tabitha protested weakly, though perhaps she had been in some way. Mason's lips quirked in that almost smile. Good night, Tabitha. Good night, Mason. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Tabitha couldn't deny the small seed of hope that had taken root in her heart, hope for something she hadn't dared consider since Daniel's death. November gave way to December, bringing with it bitter cold and the first dusting of snow to the hills surrounding Silverhorn. As Tabitha's time grew nearer, Mason insisted she reduce her duties, bringing in a young girl from a neighboring ranch to help with the heavier chores. I'm perfectly capable, Tabitha protested when he announced this arrangement at breakfast. Never said you weren't, Mason replied calmly, buttering a biscuit. But there's no sense in you wearing yourself out before the baby comes. His tone brooked no argument, and Tabitha reluctantly agreed. With more time on her hands, Tabitha found herself drawn to Sarah's sewing room, which she'd avoided since discovering the journal. With Mason's permission, she began to prepare the space for her child, washing the tiny clothes Sarah had lovingly made, airing out the crib, and adding touches of her own, a quilt she pieced together from scraps, a mobile fashioned from colored paper and string. Mason would sometimes watch from the doorway as she worked, his expression unreadable. Once, she caught him standing over the crib, running his hand along the smooth wooden rail, lost in thought. She would have been a wonderful mother, Tabitha said softly. Mason didn't turn, but she saw his shoulders tense. She would have. The best. Tell me about her? For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. Sarah was sunshine. That's what our mother used to say. Never saw the bad in anyone. Laughed easily, loved deeply. He turned to face Tabitha, his eyes full of memories. She married young James was a good man, though not strong enough to weather her loss. She wanted children more than anything. When she finally conceived after 5 years of trying, he trailed off. I wish I could have known her, Tabitha said truthfully. She would have liked you, Mason replied. You're strong, like she was. Different kind of strength maybe, but still. He hesitated, then added, I found something of hers I thought you might want to see. He led her to his study, a room she cleaned but rarely entered when he was present. From a drawer in his desk, he withdrew a daguerreotype in a silver frame. It showed a beautiful young woman with Mason's blue eyes, sitting beside a handsome man, both smiling at the camera. Sarah and James, on their wedding day, Mason explained. Tabitha studied the image. She was lovely, Yes. Mason carefully returned the photograph to the drawer. Sometimes I think, if I'd been here instead of out with the herd, if I'd gotten the doctor sooner. You can't blame yourself, Tabitha said, instinctively reaching for his hand. Childbirth is always a risk, no matter the circumstances. His fingers tightened around hers. I know that. In my head, I know it. But my heart? He looked down at their joined hands, then slowly, deliberately, released her. You should rest. Doctor's coming tomorrow for a check. The abrupt change of subject was typical of Mason whenever conversation veered too close to emotions, but Tabitha didn't press. She was beginning to understand this complex man, his deep capacity for feeling matched only by his rigid self-control. The doctor's visit the next day confirmed that all was proceeding normally with her pregnancy. Any day now, Dr. Wilson pronounced, packing up his bag. First babies often come late, but everything looks to be in order. After he left, Mason found Tabitha in the kitchen, preparing dinner despite his repeated suggestions that she rest. Doctor say everything's all right? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Perfect, she assured him, though he thinks I should be confined to bed, as you do. Mason's mouth twitched. Stubborn woman. Pot, kettle, she retorted, earning a rare chuckle from him. Touché. He stepped fully into the kitchen. Tabitha, I've been thinking. When the baby comes? Yes? You'll need time to recover. I want you to know your position here is secure, no matter how long that takes. And afterward, if you'd like to continue working but need different arrangements, we can discuss it. Tabitha set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. Thank you, Mason. That means more than I can say. He nodded, looking uncomfortable as he always did with gratitude. Also, I've had Tommy ride to town to fetch Mrs. Castillo. She'll stay here until the baby comes, just to be safe. That's very thoughtful, but... Please, Mason interrupted, his voice suddenly intense. Let me do this. I can't. He stopped, his jaw working. I need to know you'll both be all right. The raw emotion in his voice stripped away Tabitha's objections. All right, she agreed softly. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. I had this brought up from the cellar. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small carved wooden horse. Made it for Sarah's baby. Never got the chance to give it. Would like your little one to have it, if that's all right. Tabitha took the small treasure, touched beyond words at the gesture. It's beautiful, Mason. Thank you. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something warm and fragile and full of possibility. For a breathless moment, Tabitha thought he might step closer, might breach the careful distance he always maintained. Instead, he nodded once and left, the moment slipping away like sand through fingers. That night, as a full moon hung over Silverhorn, Tabitha was awakened by a sharp, insistent pain that left no doubt her time had come. Mrs. Castillo, a capable Mexican woman in her 50s who had arrived that afternoon, took command of the situation with calm efficiency. Mason, awakened by the commotion, paced the hallway outside Tabitha's room like a caged animal, his face drawn with worry. Mr. Montgomery, Mrs. Castillo said firmly, you will wear a hole in the floor. Go downstairs, make coffee. This will take time. Reluctantly, Mason obeyed. But Tabitha could hear his heavy footsteps below, moving restlessly from room to room as her labor progressed. The hours blurred together in a haze of pain and determination. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, painting the snow-dusted landscape in shades of pink and gold, Tabitha finally heard the cry she'd been waiting for her child's first breath in the world. A girl, Mrs. Castillo announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean blanket. Strong and healthy. Exhausted but elated, Tabitha reached for her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she beheld the tiny, perfect features. "Hello, my love," she whispered. "I've waited so long to meet you." After cleaning and examining both mother and child, Mrs. Castillo went to the door and opened it. Mason stood just outside, his normally composed face a study in anxiety. "Come," the midwife said. "Meet the newest resident of Silverhorn." Mason entered hesitantly, his eyes widening as they fell upon Tabitha cradling her newborn. Something in his expression broke Tabitha's heart, a mixture of joy, grief, and longing so intense it was almost painful to witness. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "just like her mother." The words, spoken with such sincerity, brought fresh tears to Tabitha's eyes. "Would you like to hold her?" Mason looked startled, then terrified at the suggestion. "I don't know how." "It's easy," Tabitha assured him. "Come sit here." Awkwardly, Mason perched on the edge of the bed. With Mrs. Castillo's help, Tabitha transferred the tiny bundle into his arms. His large, work-roughened hands cradled the infant with surprising gentleness, and the look of wonder on his face as he gazed down at her was something Tabitha knew she would never forget. "What will you name her?" he asked softly, one finger carefully stroking the baby's downy cheek. Tabitha had thought long about this moment. "Sarah," she said, "Sarah Daniel Montgomery Lawson, for her father, and for your sister who has given us a home." Mason's head jerked up, his eyes meeting hers in shock. "Tabitha, you don't have to." "I want to," she said firmly. "Without your sister's room, her clothes, her legacy, and without you, Mason, neither of us would be here now. It's right that she carries the name." Mason looked back down at the baby, and Tabitha saw him blink rapidly several times. "Sarah," he repeated softly. "It suits her." When he finally, reluctantly, returned the baby to Tabitha's arms, his hand lingered for a moment on her arm. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me be part of this." As he left to give them rest, Tabitha felt a contentment she hadn't known in a very long time. For the first time since Daniel's death, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with joy rather than mere survival, a future that, increasingly, she couldn't picture without Mason Montgomery in it. The weeks following Sarah's birth brought changes to Silverhorn. Mason insisted that Tabitha take at least a month to recover, hiring a woman from town to handle household duties in the meantime. He became a frequent visitor to Tabitha's room, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers he'd spotted on his rides, a book he thought she might enjoy, a piece of butterscotch candy from the general store. Each visit revealed a different side of him, gentler, more open than the reserved rancher she'd first met. He would sit by her bedside, sometimes reading aloud while she nursed Sarah, other times simply talking about his day or asking about hers. The baby fascinated him. He would watch her for hours, marveling at her tiny fingers and the expressions that crossed her face in sleep. By the time Tabitha was up and about again, moving through the house with Sarah cradled in one arm, something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful distance Mason had maintained was narrowing, and Tabitha found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the sound of his boots on the porch, the scent of leather and sun-warmed skin when he came in from the fields, the way his eyes sought hers across the dinner table. One evening in January, as a bitter, cold snap held the ranch in its grip, Tabitha sat in the parlor mending one of Mason's shirts while Sarah slept in her cradle nearby. Mason entered, stomping snow from his boots, his face reddened from the cold. "Storm's getting worse," he announced, rubbing his hands together. "Might be snowed in for a few days." "I made sure we have plenty of firewood and food," Tabitha assured him, "though I worry about the men in the bunkhouse." "They're well stocked," Mason said, moving to stand by the fire. His eyes fell on her mending. "You don't have to do that. Not part of your duties." Tabitha smiled. "I don't mind. Gives me something to do while she sleeps." She gestured to Sarah. Besides, you've done so much for us. It's the least I can do. Mason was quiet for a moment, watching the flames. Been thinking about that, about what happens next. Next? He turned to face her, his expression serious. Spring will be here before we know it. You're recovered now. The baby's thriving. Soon you'll be thinking of moving on, making your own way. The thought sent an unexpected pang through Tabitha's heart. I hadn't really considered it yet. No rush, Mason said quickly. You're welcome here as long as you want. But I thought... He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. I thought you should have this, for your future, yours and Sarah's. He handed her the pouch, which was surprisingly heavy. Opening it, Tabitha gasped at the sight of several gold coins. Mason, I can't accept this. It's not charity, he said firmly. It's your wages, plus a bonus. You've worked hard, made this house a home again. You've earned it. Tabitha stared at the gold, which represented more money than she'd ever possessed at one time. With it, she could start fresh somewhere, rent a small house, perhaps open a dressmaking shop or a bakery. She and Sarah could have a decent life. So why did the thought fill her with such dread? Thank you, she said, carefully closing the pouch. But Mason, I'm not sure I want to leave Silverhorn. Something flickered in his eyes' hope, quickly masked. No? No. Sarah and we've found peace here. Happiness. She took a deep breath. Unless you want us to go? Want you to go? Mason repeated, as if the words made no sense. Tabitha, He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm not good with words. Never have been. Try, she encouraged softly. Please. Mason paced the room, clearly struggling. Finally, he stopped before her. When you came here, I thought I was helping you, offering sanctuary. But the truth is, you saved me just as much. This house was... He gestured around them. Empty. Just a place to sleep between workdays. Now it's full again, with light and warmth and... His eyes moved to Sarah, then back to Tabitha. And I find myself thinking of the future again. A future that includes you both. Tabitha's heart quickened. What are you saying, Mason? I'm saying... He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. I'm saying I love you, Tabitha Lawson. Love your strength, and your kindness, and your courage. Love that little girl like she was my own blood. And if you'd consider it, I'm asking you to stay. Not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. Tears filled Tabitha's eyes. Mason. His face fell. It's too soon. I understand. You loved Daniel, and I'd never... No, she interrupted, squeezing his hands. It's not that. Daniel will always have a place in my heart as Sarah will in yours. But I've grown to love you too, Mason Montgomery. So much that it frightens me sometimes. Hope blazed in his blue eyes. Then you'll marry me? In answer, Tabitha leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, their first kiss, sweet and tentative at first, then deepening with the months of longing neither had fully acknowledged. When they finally parted, Mason's smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. Is that a yes? Yes. Tabitha laughed through her tears. Yes. I'll marry you. A small sound from the cradle drew their attention. Sarah was awake, her tiny fists waving in the air. Mason reached in and gently lifted her, cradling her against his chest with the ease of practice. What do you think, little one? He asked the baby. Will you have me for a father? As if in answer, Sarah cooed and caught one of his fingers in her tiny hand. Mason looked up at Tabitha, his eyes shining with tears and joy. They called you a sin for carrying alone, he said softly, but you were never alone. And now, you never will be again. Spring came early to Silverhorn that year, as if nature itself approved of the union being celebrated on the first warm Saturday in March. The ranch was transformed for the occasion. Wildflowers adorned every surface. Tables were set up beneath the old oak tree, and a makeshift dance floor had been constructed near the house. Tabitha stood before the mirror in what was now her and Mason's bedroom, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The wedding dress, a gift from Mrs. Castillo and the other ranch wives, was simple but elegant, ivory satin that complemented her dark hair and brought out the golden flecks in her brown eyes. 3 months had passed since Mason's proposal. 3 months of joy and planning and deepening love. Each day had revealed new facets of the man she was about to marry: his dry humor, his gentle patience with Sarah, his unwavering integrity in all things. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Castillo entered, carrying Sarah, who was dressed in a tiny white gown with a ribbon in her dark curls. "It is time, Carita," the older woman said with a warm smile. "Your handsome cowboy waits." Taking a deep breath, Tabitha descended the stairs and stepped out onto the porch. The gathered crowd, ranch hands, neighbors, even some townsfolk who had once whispered behind her back, turned to watch as she began her walk toward Mason, who stood beneath an arch of spring blossoms with the minister. Mason's face, as he watched her approach, was everything Tabitha could have wished for: love, pride, and a touch of awe that made her heart swell. When she reached him, he took her hands in his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows. "I, Mason Montgomery, take you, Tabitha Lawson, to be my lawfully wedded wife." As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Mason had ridden all the way to Denver to select, Tabitha felt the last shadows of her past recede. The pain of Daniel's loss would always be with her, but it no longer defined her. Instead, she stood in the light of a new beginning, surrounded by love. "By the power vested in me," the minister concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Mason's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all the days to come. When they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery, Sarah in Tabitha's arms, the cheers that erupted were deafening. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than Tabitha had ever seen in one place. As twilight deepened into darkness, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Montgomery?" Mason asked, finding her at the edge of the dance floor after she had put Sarah to bed. "Completely," Tabitha replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I have something for you. A wedding gift." He led her away from the celebration to the corral, where a beautiful bay mare stood saddled, a ribbon tied to her bridle. "Mason, she's gorgeous. Thought it was time you had your own horse," he explained, "for when Sarah's old enough to ride with you. And for now." He reached into the saddlebag and withdrew a rolled parchment, handing it to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. Tabitha unrolled it to find a deed to Silverhorn Ranch, with both their names listed as owners. "Mason, I don't understand." "It's yours now, too," he said simply. "Everything I have, everything I am." Wanted to make it official. Overcome, Tabitha wrapped her arms around his neck. "I love you, Mason Montgomery." "And I love you, Tabitha Montgomery." He kissed her, a kiss full of promise for the future they would build together. "Come on, we should get back before they notice we're gone." Hand in hand, they walked back to the celebration, to their friends and their home and the life that stretched before them, a life born from kindness offered when it was needed most, from the courage to begin again, and from love that had transformed them both. 5 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Silverhorn as Tabitha sat on the front porch, watching Mason teach 5-year-old Sarah to ride her new pony. Their laughter carried on the crisp air as Sarah, fearless as always, urged the gentle animal into a trot, her dark curls bouncing beneath her small hat. "Mama, look," she called. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see, darling," Tabitha called back, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach where their second child grew. "You're doing wonderfully." Beside her, in a small rocking chair, sat 3-year-old Thomas, named for faithful Tommy, who had been the first to welcome her to Silverhorn and who now managed the eastern pastures with his new bride. The boy was the image of his father, with the same serious blue eyes and quiet disposition. "Papa teaching Sarah to ride," Thomas observed solemnly. "Yes, sweetheart, and when you're a little bigger, he'll teach you too." Thomas nodded, satisfied with this promise, and returned to the wooden horse he was playing with, the very same one Mason had carved for Sarah's baby all those years ago. Silverhorn had prospered under their joint care. The ranch had expanded, adding new pasture land and cattle. The house had grown too, with a new wing built to accommodate their growing family and the frequent visitors they hosted. The town of Silver Creek had changed as well. The railroad had finally reached them, bringing new opportunities and people. Mrs. Whitaker had sold the general store 2 years back and moved to Denver, much to everyone's quiet relief. In her place, a young couple ran the shop with fairness and friendliness. Tabitha's position in the community had transformed completely. Now respected as Mrs. Montgomery, wife of one of the region's most successful ranchers, she used her influence to help other women in difficult circumstances. The small fund she and Mason had established provided assistance to widows and unmarried mothers, offering them the same chance at a new beginning that she had received. As Sarah's lesson concluded, Mason lifted her from the pony and set her on his shoulders, striding toward the house with her giggling above him. The sight still made Tabitha's heart swell, this strong, serious man who had become the most devoted father she could imagine. "Mama," Sarah called, "Papa says I'm the best rider in Colorado Territory." "Well, if Papa says so, it must be true," Tabitha replied with a smile. Mason set Sarah down, and she immediately grabbed her brother's hand. "Come on, Thomas. Let's go see if Mrs. Jimenez made cookies." The children scampered inside, leaving their parents alone on the porch. Mason sat beside Tabitha, his hand automatically finding hers, fingers intertwining with the familiarity of long love. "She's fearless, that one," he remarked, pride evident in his voice. "Like her father," Tabitha teased. I seem to recall a certain woman who arrived at Silverhorn holding her head high, despite what the whole town thought of her. If that's not fearless, I don't know what is." Tabitha leaned against his shoulder. "We've come a long way since then." "Yes, we have." Mason's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Any regrets?" It was a question he still asked occasionally, as if part of him couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Tabitha's answer was always the same. Not one. She guided his hand to her belly where their third child stirred. "Every step, every choice led us here. How could I regret that?" Mason smiled, the full, unguarded smile that had once been so rare, but now came easily in the sanctuary of his family's love. He leaned over to kiss her, a kiss that still held the same wonder as their first. "I was thinking," he said as they parted, "about what you said when you first came here, about being called a sin. That seems so long ago now." "It does. But I was thinking about how strange life is, how something the world calls a sin can lead to such blessing." His eyes moved toward the door where their children had disappeared, then back to her face. "You and Sarah coming into my life was the greatest blessing I've ever known." "And you were our salvation," Tabitha replied softly. "Just like you promised that day in town." "No." Mason shook his head. "We saved each other." That's what love does, I think. Gives us the strength to save each other. As the sun dipped toward the western mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Tabitha Montgomery looked out over the land that had become her home, at the man who had become her heart, and felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Once she had been alone, carrying a burden of grief and uncertainty, marked by judgment and whispers. Now she carried something different: love, belonging, purpose. The journey hadn't been easy, but sitting here, with Mason's arm around her shoulders and their children's laughter drifting from inside, Tabitha knew with absolute certainty. Every step had been worth taking, every challenge worth facing, for it had led her here, to Silverhorn, to Mason, to the family and the love that had transformed a desperate young woman's life into something beautiful beyond imagining. As if reading her thoughts, Mason squeezed her hand gently. "I love you, Tabitha Montgomery." "And I love you, Mason Montgomery," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. Together they sat, watching night fall over the home they had built, not just the buildings and the land, but the life they shared. A life that had begun with an act of kindness when it was most needed, and had grown into a love story that would be told for generations to come. The end.